Why, hello there. Sexy Matt the Pharaoh Wizard here. And I thought I would live up to the sexy part of the name a little bit more in this episode. And since 90 nostalgia is hugely on the rise, as 90s kids like myself are now getting to our middle ages, I thought it'd be a lot of fun to talk about my crushes from the 90s, the girls that will always remind me of a simpler time. So, in no particular order, I bring you my top 10 crushes of the 90s. Let's get into it.
Number 10, Shirley Manson.
So barely squeaking into the 90s, Shirley Manson was the dark goth girl that I always loved. She may not have been the classic wearing vinyl. With her dark clothing and almost porcelain skin, she kind of embodied what a goth girl was to me. And with her incredibly harsh, dark lyrics and her unabashed dark tone, I was immediately intrigued by her. She definitely hit the later part of the 90s getting into this, but Shirley Manson was a huge part of the 90s.
Number 9, Madonna.
Of course, no list of women from the 90s is complete without Madonna. You can have your 80s Madonna with You're Like a Virgin and Desperately Seeking Susan, but the 90s is when Madonna was goddamn unstoppable. And with people lining up around the block to buy her sex book and just trying to shock people with all sorts of shenanigans, Madonna was... that is the peak Madonna in the 90s. Of course, later, nowadays, she sucks very hard, but 90s Madonna is classic vintage Madonna.
Number 8, Melissa Joan Hart.
So one thing you're going to notice about this list is I'm more intrigued with the characters that these actors portray rather than the actors themselves, because I was younger when this was, when I remember these ladies. And, of course, Melissa Joan Hart was a huge part of the 90s. Most people remember her as Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but I remember her as Clarissa from Clarissa Explains It All. And as most of my friends would know, she's perfect for me because she has absolutely no interest in having any sort of romantic relationship. Clarissa had no boyfriend on the show. She wasn't going after guys. More than anything, she's going after trying to get a car, which is interesting. But Melissa Joan Hart playing her was fantastic, and she was the quirky girl next door, a little bit of the manic pixie dream girl before Zooey Deschanel ruined that. But she definitely deserves a spot on this list as someone I fondly remember from the 90s.
Number 7, Winona Ryder.
So Winona from the 90s is classic vintage Winona Ryder. That is just like finding an old video game that is still great today. Winona in the 90s was amazing, specifically Lydia Dietz from Beetlejuice. I really took to that character because I, too, am dark and unusual. But anything from her from the 90s was just very intriguing, and again, it ties into that goth girl that I like, that style. But she was also always played very intriguing characters, very different, interesting characters. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed following her career that way. And you know what? She's still fantastic today. One of the rare that don't suck in today's world. So there you go.
Number 6, Christina Applegate.
Of course, Kelly Bundy. Married with Children. I was very young when that show started and came out, and for some reason my parents still let me watch it. Not sure why, but anyways. Kelly, since I was so young, was what I imagined all high school girls were like. Walking around in her either ripped jeans or, mini dresses. I remember a lot of Kelly Bundy, and she really set up a standard that no girl would reach when I would hit high school. But still, she really epitomized the classic sleaze look of the late 80s, early 90s. And just, that's what I think about when you're talking early 90s metal. That's the kind of girl I'm imagining is watching that.
Number 5, Britney Spears.
Like Madonna, of course Britney Spears definitely deserves to be on this list. If you were around in the 90s, you were at least intrigued by Britney Spears. She came out of nowhere, and did her cute little girl in the, schoolgirl outfit, but then just became this monstrosity of a personality that you could not escape. And maybe you didn't really want to, because she also seemed like the girl next door, even though she was, a multi-millionaire, singing personality. But you'd still be like, I can relate to her. I know this girl. And she did that really well. And yeah, you can't leave off Britney Spears off the 90s list. Come on.
Number 4, Alicia Silverstone.
Ah yes, Cher from Clueless. Alicia Silverstone is probably one of my earlier celebrity crushes. And with Clueless and The Crush and Blast from the Past, it's easy to see why. She always played this kind of down-to-earth, spunky, yet slightly crazy kind of girl. And of course, Clueless was one of those movies that just epitomized the 90s. So any list that talks about the 90s must talk about Clueless. But I loved her in Clueless, and I loved her as an actress. Of course, she went on to suck in Batman and Robin, but that wasn't totally her fault.
Number 3, Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Of course, she was in Party of Five and things of that nature. And, I didn't really get into those. What I really remember Jennifer Love Hewitt from is the most 90s of movies ever, Can't Hardly Wait. Like, this is the epitome of 90s is this movie. If you see this movie, you know what the late 90s looked like. This was the epitome of that. And I really related to the main character in this movie. So, of course, the girl that he is lusting after is the one I lusted after. She is just this goddess of a lady in this movie. And with that classic, blue tank top, blue skirt look, like you could even cosplay as that, and at least I would know what you're going for. But she was just like this epitome of the prom queen girl, but that would still give my nerdiness the time of day. And I cling to that for some reason. But I really loved Jennifer Love Hewitt, and they even followed her music career when she got into that. But she was definitely something that I think about when I think 90s.
Number 2, Amy Jo Johnson.
So, of course, I said this list is in no particular order, but these last two are definitely very important to adolescent Matt. We all have that person you kind of remember was what you first noticed when you started noticing the opposite sex. Amy Jo Johnson, the Pink Ranger, is that for me. She was great as the Pink Ranger, and, beautiful and talented and good-hearted. She was fantastic, and she is also another epitome of the 90s, especially when you look at her wardrobe, down to the spaghetti strap sundress over a white t-shirt, which is the classic 90s style, of course. But I remember thinking of, the Pink Ranger and just being immediately enamored with her. And I really liked the Pink Ranger. She was a lot of fun. She was a little bit of standard of your damsel in distress, but I liked what she did, and I enjoyed the Pink Ranger.
Number 1, Gwen Stefani.
So like Amy Jo Johnson, Gwen Stefani is very important to me. Specifically in the Spiderwebs music video, I remember seeing that and was blown away for multiple reasons. One, I was just barely getting into Southern California skate punk, and I've never heard ska before, so this is the first time hearing something like ska and something that different and weird. But then seeing this strong, crazy girl singer fronting this band and just being so brash and unapologetic and kick-ass and just like not taking anyone's shit, like that's the first time I realized a woman could be like that. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was out there kicking ass and taking names, and that is the Gwen Stefani I remember and love. Of course, like Madonna, she sucks now a lot, but 90s Gwen Stefani is so good. And, there was a time, at least in my age bracket, where when Gwen Stefani did a thing, all the girls did it. Like, she was a fashion icon of the 90s, as well as just, for me, this perfect picture of this kick-ass, unapologetic, take no prisoners, kick-ass woman. And I didn't realize girls could be like that, and she made me realize that. And, she was the epitome of the 90s, of course. So that was my top 10 crushes of the 90s. Who are your crushes? Whose poster did you look at while you used your 8-ball slammer on some pogs? Or whose picture was your background on your Windows 95 computer as you used your 56K modem to dial into America Online? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think of 90s people. If you weren't in the 90s, do these girls still look cheesy now? I don't know. I still enjoy them. They're still a lot of fun to look back at and remember the 90s. I'm Sexy Matt the Pharaoh Wizard. Until next time, I'll be living La Vida Loca.